A small thrift store tucked away on a quiet street, shelves packed with forgotten treasures. A place where every item tells a story, waiting for someone to uncover it. One rainy afternoon, the owner, Ethan, was sorting through a shipment of old antiques. Most of the items were dusty and unremarkable, but then he saw it. A mask. Not just any mask, a dark, intricately carved ceremonial mask that seemed to almost stare back at him. Its hollow eyes, sharp contours, and strange symbols etched into the wood gave it an unsettling aura. Ethan's curiosity was piqued. As he held it, something strange happened. His fingertips tingled as though the mask was alive. It felt warm. Ethan laughed it off, muttering to himself, "I've been watching too many horror movies." But what he didn't notice was the faint glow that flickered across the mask's surface. A glow that disappeared as quickly as it came. He decided to place it in the store's display window, hoping its unusual design would attract collectors. But as the hours passed, Ethan found himself drawn to the mask. It was as if it was calling to him. "Just try it on," he whispered to himself, chuckling nervously. After all, what harm could it do? The moment he placed the mask on his face, everything changed. The store around him seemed to darken, the air growing thick. And then he saw them. Shadows. Figures standing in the corners of the room. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, staring straight at him. Ethan froze. His heart pounded in his chest. Who are you?" he stammered. But the figures didn't respond. They only moved closer. Suddenly a voice, low and raspy, whispered in his ear, "You are the mask of the dead. Now you see what they see." Terrified, Ethan ripped the mask off his face and stumbled back. The shadows vanished as quickly as they appeared. The store was silent again, but the mask sat there, mocking him with its cold, unchanging expression. Ethan knew he had unlocked something far more sinister than he'd bargained for. But the real question was, could he lock it back, or was it already too late? The night after Ethan's first encounter with the mask was anything but restful. Tossing and turning in his small apartment above the store, he couldn't shake the feeling of those hollow eyes watching him. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wind outside felt unnatural, as though something or someone was trying to reach him. By morning, he convinced himself it was just his imagination. "You're being ridiculous," he muttered, sipping his coffee and staring at the mask in the display window below. Yet, deep down, he knew it wasn't just in his head. Customers came and went throughout the day, but no one paid much attention to the mask. Ethan noticed something strange, though. Each time a customer passed near it, they would pause and glance around, as if sensing something was there. One woman even shivered, saying, "It's so cold over here," before hurrying out. By evening, Ethan couldn't resist anymore. He needed answers. Grabbing his phone, he snapped a picture of the mask and posted it to a local antique forum, asking if anyone recognized its design. Minutes turned into hours. As he was about to give up, a reply popped up. "Where did you find this?" "Destroy it immediately. It's cursed." His heart skipped a beat. Curious and unsettled, Ethan replied, asking for more details. The user didn't respond, but instead they sent a single link, a blog post about an ancient tribe known for their ceremonial sacrifices. According to the post, these masks were used during rituals to connect the wearer with the spirits of those sacrificed. But the article warned, once the connection was made, it could not be undone. The mask and its wearer would be bound forever. Ethan stared at the screen, the words blurring in front of his eyes. "Bound forever," he whispered. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the forum user. "You haven't worn it, have you?" Ethan's stomach sank. He didn't reply. Instead, he turned to look at the mask, its hollow eyes glinting in the dim light of the store. That's when he noticed something he hadn't before. Small, dark stains at the edges of the mask. Stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood. A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't just a mask. It was something far more sinister. But before Ethan could think of what to do, the lights in the store flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. And in that moment, he swore he heard faint whispers echoing from the mask. Whispers calling his name. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. Ethan sat frozen in the darkness of the store, his heart pounding like a drum. The whispers had stopped, but the silence that followed was even more unsettling. He reached for his phone, its dim screen the only source of light, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, landing on the mask. It sat exactly where he had left it, but something felt off. The hollow eyes seemed deeper now, almost alive, as if they were watching him. He swallowed hard. "It's just a trick of the light," he whispered, trying to convince himself. But deep down he knew better. Ethan grabbed a cloth and cautiously approached the mask. The dark stains he had noticed earlier seemed more pronounced now, as though they had grown overnight. He wiped at them, but the stains wouldn't budge. Instead, the cloth came away damp, smeared with what looked disturbingly like fresh blood. A sharp knock at the door startled him, and he nearly dropped the mask. He spun around, shining his flashlight toward the entrance. The store was closed, and it was late. Who could possibly be there at this hour? He hesitated before approaching the door. Through the glass, he could make out the silhouette of a man standing completely still. His face was obscured by the darkness outside. Ethan cracked the door open just enough to speak. "We're closed. Can I help you?" The man stepped closer, his features finally visible in the dim streetlight. He was an older gentleman with deep-set eyes and a weathered face, wearing a long coat that looked like it had seen better days. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. Ethan's breath caught. "What are you talking about?" "The mask," the man replied, his eyes narrowing. "You've put it on, haven't you?" Ethan's blood ran cold. "How do you know about that?" The man shook his head. "That mask carries a curse, boy. It binds you to the dead. The more you wear it, the closer they get. And once they're close enough," he trailed off, his expression grim. Ethan's grip on the door tightened. "What am I supposed to do? How do I get rid of it?" The man looked over Ethan's shoulder toward the mask. "Getting rid of it won't help now. The spirits have already marked you." Ethan felt a surge of panic. "There has to be something I can do." The man hesitated before pulling a small, tattered book from his coat. "This might help. It's a record of the rituals tied to that mask. But be warned, the answers you're looking for come at a price." Ethan took the book, his hands trembling. "Who are you?" The man stepped back into the shadows. "Someone who's seen what that mask can do. Be careful, boy. The dead don't let go easily." And with that, he disappeared into the night, leaving Ethan alone with the mask, the book, and a growing sense of dread. Whatever was coming next, he knew he wasn't ready. Ethan locked the door behind him, his hands shaking as he clutched the old, tattered book the mysterious man had given him. The store felt unnervingly quiet, as if even the air itself was holding its breath. Sitting at the counter, he opened the book carefully. Its yellowed pages were filled with strange symbols, handwritten notes, and sketches of masks similar to the one in his shop. But one page, in particular, caught his eye, a drawing of his mask. Beneath it was a single sentence written in bold, messy handwriting. "The wearer becomes the bridge." Ethan frowned. "Bridge? What does that even mean?" he muttered to himself. The following pages explained more about the rituals tied to the mask. It described how ancient tribes believed the mask allowed the wearer to connect with the spirits of the dead, particularly those who had suffered violent or unjust deaths. The spirits would share their pain, their anger, and eventually their control. Ethan's chest tightened. Control? Did that mean they could take over his body? Flipping further, he found a section titled "The Bound." It detailed the fate of those who had worn the mask. According to the text, the spirits would grow stronger with each wear, their connection to the wearer becoming permanent. The only way to sever the bond was through a dangerous ritual, a ritual that required the wearer to confront the spirits directly. Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Confront them? How am I supposed to do that? As if in response, a sudden thud echoed from the display window. His heart leaped as he turned toward the sound. The mask had fallen from its stand and now lay face up on the floor, its hollow eyes staring at him. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No way. I didn't touch it." The room grew colder, and faint whispers began to fill the air. Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps as he backed away. Then, the whispers grew louder, forming distinct words. "Put it on, see us, free us." Ethan froze. "Free you? What are you talking about?" The whispers didn't answer, but they didn't stop either. The mask seemed to radiate an unseen force, pulling him closer. Against his better judgment, Ethan stepped forward, his hand trembling as it reached for the mask. The moment his fingers brushed against it, the room spun, and everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in his store. He stood in a shadowy landscape, surrounded by figures, hundreds of them, all staring at him with hollow, lifeless eyes. Their faces were twisted in pain, their bodies draped in tattered, ancient clothing. Ethan's voice quivered. What do you want from me?" One figure stepped forward, its voice echoing in Ethan's mind. "You wear the mask. You open the door. Now you must carry our pain, or find the truth that binds us here." Ethan shook his head, backing away. "I don't understand. What truth?" But the spirits only grew closer, their whispers merging into a deafening roar. Ethan clutched his ears, falling to his knees as their voices filled his head. And just like that, he was back in the store, the mask in his hands. But something was different. His vision blurred, and he could see faint outlines of the spirits in the corners of the room, watching him, waiting. Ethan knew now that this wasn't just about survival. He had to uncover the mask's secrets, or he'd be consumed by the spirits forever. Ethan's hands trembled as he set the mask down on the counter. The faint outlines of the spirits lingered at the edges of his vision, flickering like shadows cast by an unseen flame. His heart pounded, but he knew panic wouldn't help. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. He flipped through the tattered book again, searching for clues about the ritual. As he scanned the pages, he found a section titled "The Path of Liberation." It described a ritual that required the wearer to enter the spirit realm willingly, confront the bound souls, and uncover the truth of their suffering. Only by understanding their pain could the bond be broken. But the instructions were vague. They mentioned offerings, symbols, and chants, but most of the text had been smudged or torn. The only clear part was a chilling warning. "Do not proceed if your heart carries fear. The spirits will prey upon it." Ethan sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Great. Fearless. That's totally me," he muttered sarcastically. Just then his phone buzzed. It was a text from his friend Marcus, who was also his go-to guy for weird artifacts and historical info. "Got your message. That mask? Bad news. Call me." Ethan wasted no time, dialing Marcus. Marcus picked up on the first ring. "Ethan, tell me you haven't put that thing on." There was a long pause before Ethan replied. "I might have." Marcus groaned loudly. "Of course you did. Listen, that mask is tied to sacrificial rituals from an ancient tribe. They believed it trapped the souls of the sacrificed. The wearer becomes a conduit, a way for the spirits to tell their story and sometimes to seek revenge." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Revenge? On who?" "On anyone connected to the mask's origins," Marcus said gravely. "And if you're not connected, they'll make you pay for meddling with their relic." Ethan's stomach churned. "So what do I do? How do I stop this?" Marcus hesitated. "There's a way, but it's risky. You have to finish the ritual they started. That means entering their world, learning their truth, and finding out what holds them here." "But Ethan, the spirits might not want you to leave." Ethan closed his eyes, his mind racing. The idea of stepping into the spirit realm again terrified him, but the thought of being haunted forever was worse. I don't have a choice, Marcus, he said finally. This thing is already messing with me. I have to end it. Marcus sighed. Then you'll need some supplies. Salt, candles, and something to ground you. A personal object with strong emotional value. And Ethan, don't do this alone. If anything goes wrong, someone has to pull you back. Ethan glanced around the empty store. Yeah, about that. My usual backup team is unavailable. Then you're going to have to be extra careful, Marcus warned. This isn't a game. After hanging up, Ethan gathered what he could. A handful of candles from the store's decor section, a small packet of salt from the break room, and a photo of his late sister, Claire, which he always carried in his wallet. He set everything up in a circle on the floor, the mask at the center. Taking a deep breath, he lit the candles and sprinkled the salt in a ring around himself. The flames flickered unnaturally, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Holding the photo close, he whispered, Claire, if you're watching, I could really use some help right now. The air grew colder, and the faint outlines of the spirits reappeared, circling him like vultures. Their whispers grew louder, merging into a single, chilling command. Wear it again. Ethan's hands shook as he reached for the mask. This time he knew what was coming, but he had no idea if he'd make it back. With one last deep breath, he placed the mask over his face, and the world dissolved into darkness. Ethan felt himself falling, weightless and cold, as the darkness wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket. Suddenly, he landed with a jolt, his feet hitting solid ground. He opened his eyes to find himself in the spirit realm once more. The air was heavy, thick with a sense of despair that made it hard to breathe. The landscape was an endless void, punctuated by faint, ghostly images of the real world. A tree here, a building there, all flickering like static on an old television. But what caught his attention was the group of spirits standing in the distance, their hollow eyes fixed on him. Ethan straightened, forcing himself to stand tall. I'm here to help you, he called out, his voice echoing in the emptiness. But I can't do that if you keep haunting me. Tell me what you want. The spirits didn't move at first, their forms shifting and shimmering like smoke in the wind. Then one stepped forward, a woman dressed in ceremonial robes, her face a mixture of sorrow and rage. You wear the mask, she said, her voice resonating in Ethan's mind. You are the bridge. You must carry our pain. Ethan clenched his fists. I don't understand. Pain from what? Why are you still here? The woman extended her hand, and in a flash, the scene around Ethan changed. He was no longer in the void, but in a dense jungle. The air was humid, and the sound of drums echoed through the trees. In the distance, he saw a clearing where a group of people had gathered. They were performing a ritual. A young man knelt at the center, his head bowed, while others chanted and danced around him. The woman from the spirit realm was there, holding the very mask Ethan had found. She raised it high, her voice ringing out in an ancient language Ethan couldn't understand. As the mask was placed on the young man's face, a piercing scream tore through the air. The jungle faded, and Ethan was back in the void, the spirits now circling him. What happened to him? Ethan asked, his voice trembling. Was he sacrificed? The woman nodded, her expression dark. He was the first. Many followed. The mask trapped their souls, binding them to its curse. We are the forgotten, our stories erased, our pain ignored. Ethan swallowed hard. But why me? Why did the mask come to me? Another spirit spoke, its voice a deep growl. You chose us. You brought us back into the world when you put it on. Now you must finish what was started. Ethan's mind raced. How? How do I free you? The woman pointed to the ground, where symbols began to glow faintly. The ritual must be completed. The truth must be revealed. Only then can we move on. Ethan looked at the symbols, his heart sinking. I don't even know what that means. Can you show me? The spirits didn't answer. Instead, they began to fade, their forms dissolving into the void. But before the woman disappeared completely, she whispered one last thing. Find the circle. Face the truth. The darkness closed in again, and Ethan felt himself being pulled back to the real world. He woke up gasping for air, the mask still on his face. This time, he didn't remove it. Instead, he sat there, heart pounding, trying to piece together what he had seen. And where was he supposed to find this circle? The answers were out there, and he had no choice but to uncover them before it was too late. Ethan's mind raced as he pieced together the cryptic message from the spirits. Find the circle. Face the truth. He had no idea where to start, but one thing was clear. The answers lay within the mask's past. He turned to the book again, flipping through its fragile pages until he found a section about the mask's origin. It mentioned an ancient tribe known as the Veilora, who used the mask in rituals to bridge the mortal and spirit realms. The text described a sacred circle where these ceremonies took place, surrounded by carvings and symbols meant to guide the spirits. Ethan realized he needed to find this sacred circle, but the book didn't mention where it was located. Frustrated, he stared at the mask on the counter, its hollow eyes seemingly mocking him. That's when he remembered something, the faint carvings on the mask's interior. Quickly he grabbed his phone, took a photo of the mask's inside, and zoomed in. Among the worn etchings was a symbol he hadn't noticed before, 3 concentric circles with a dot in the center. That's gotta be it, Ethan muttered, but where had he seen it before? Suddenly it hit him. While sorting through the thrift shop inventory weeks ago, he'd found an old map with strange markings. He dug through the cluttered back room, tossing aside boxes and dusty relics until he found it. The map was yellowed with age, but the symbol was there, etched near a location deep in a forest just outside town. Ethan's stomach churned. He hated the idea of venturing into the woods at night, but time was running out. The spirits were growing restless, and their presence was affecting him more each day. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, whispers grew louder, and his reflection in mirrors sometimes lingered longer than it should. With a flashlight, the mask, and the map stuffed into a backpack, Ethan set out. The forest loomed ahead, its dark canopy blotting out the moonlight. As he followed the map, the atmosphere grew heavier. The usual sounds of the forest, crickets, rustling leaves, distant owls, were absent. The silence was unnerving, and every step he took seemed to echo. He reached a clearing marked on the map. In the center was a circle of ancient stones, each carved with intricate symbols similar to the ones on the mask. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This had to be the place. Setting down his backpack, he pulled out the mask and the book. The text said the ritual required the wearer to stand at the circle's center and recite a chant to summon the spirits fully. Ethan hesitated, the weight of what he was about to do sinking in. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face the truth the spirits spoke of, but there was no turning back. Placing the mask over his face, he stepped into the circle. The air grew icy, and the stones around him began to glow faintly. The ground vibrated beneath his feet, and whispers filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Ethan opened the book, his voice trembling as he began to recite the chant. By the bond of spirit and mortal, I call upon the forgotten. Reveal your truth. Show me the pain that binds you. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, and the circle lit up with an otherworldly light. Shadows emerged from the stones, swirling around Ethan like a storm. He gripped the mask tightly, his heart pounding. And then, the spirits spoke in unison, their voices echoing with a haunting power. You seek the truth, mortal, but can you bear to see it? The world around Ethan began to shift, the forest fading away. He felt himself being pulled into another realm, one where the past and present collided. He didn't know what awaited him, but he braced himself, knowing this was the only way to end the curse. The light around Ethan faded, and he found himself standing in a completely different world. The air was heavy, thick with sorrow and despair. He was no longer in the forest. Instead, he stood in what appeared to be an ancient village. The ground beneath his feet was cracked and barren, the sky above a swirling storm of gray and black. Figures moved silently around him, villagers, their faces pale and their eyes hollow, dressed in tattered robes. They didn't acknowledge him, their gazes fixed ahead as they carried out repetitive tasks like tending to non-existent crops or walking in endless circles. Ethan's heart pounded. This must be the realm of the trapped spirits. Their pain, their anguish, it was all here, frozen in time. He turned, startled, as a voice cut through the silence. "You've crossed the veil." It was the woman's spirit, the one who had spoken to him before. She stood before him, her form more solid now, her face etched with both sadness and strength. "What is this place?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is where we linger," she replied. "Our souls are bound here, caught between life and death, because of the mask." Ethan looked at her, his throat dry. "But why? Why are you trapped? And why does the mask keep dragging people into this curse?" The woman gestured to a stone altar in the center of the village. Ethan hadn't noticed it before, but now it loomed like a dark shadow, its surface stained and cracked. That altar, the woman explained, was where sacrifices were made. The mask was created to communicate with the gods, to bring blessings to our people. But its power was corrupted. The greed of our leaders turned it into a tool for death, binding the souls of the sacrificed to the mask forever. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. But why is it still affecting people now? It was buried for so long. She stepped closer, her eyes piercing. Because the mask was never destroyed. Its power cannot fade unless the ritual is completed properly. The souls trapped within it, including mine, can only find peace if the mask is returned to its rightful place and destroyed in the light of truth. Ethan's mind raced. How do I destroy it? I'll do whatever it takes. The woman pointed back toward the stones. The circle is the key. But you must face the truth of what the mask has done, of the lives it has claimed. You will see their pain, their deaths. You must bear witness and accept the burden of their stories. Only then can the mask be unmade. Ethan hesitated. The thought of reliving the horrors of the past terrified him, but there was no other way. "Okay," he said finally. "What do I have to do?" The woman gestured, and the altar began to glow with a faint blue light. "Place the mask on the altar. The spirits will show you the truth. Do not look away, no matter how painful it becomes." With trembling hands, Ethan approached the altar. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the mask, its hollow eyes now appearing almost alive. Taking a deep breath, he placed it on the stone surface. Instantly, the air around him grew cold, and the village dissolved into a swirling storm of images. Screams echoed in his ears, and he saw flashes of the mask's dark history, the faces of those who had worn it, their terror as they were led to their deaths, their anguish as their souls were ripped from their bodies. The images overwhelmed him, each one a dagger to his heart. He saw their families mourning, their communities falling into despair, and the shadow of the mask growing darker with each sacrifice. Ethan wanted to look away, but he forced himself to keep watching. Tears streamed down his face as the weight of their pain crushed him. Finally, the storm began to calm, and the woman's voice echoed in his mind. "You have seen the truth. Now break the cycle." Ethan opened his eyes to see the mask glowing faintly on the altar. His body trembled, but he knew what he had to do. With the spirit's eyes upon him, he prepared to end the curse once and for all. Ethan stood before the glowing mask on the altar, his heart pounding in his chest. The spirits had shown him their pain, their deaths, and the dark history of the mask. Now, the weight of their fate rested on his shoulders. The spirit woman appeared beside him, her expression both solemn and hopeful. "You've seen the truth, Ethan. You've accepted the burden of their stories. Now you must act." Ethan nodded, his hands trembling. "But how do I break the cycle? What if I fail?" She placed a ghostly hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly warm. "You won't fail. You carry the strength of the living and the hopes of the dead. Destroying the mask requires courage and belief. Focus on the light of the truth, the power of what you've seen, and let it guide you." The mask began to pulse with a sinister red glow, as if resisting the ritual. Ethan's stomach twisted in fear. The air around him grew heavier, the ground trembling beneath his feet. He glanced at the woman. "What's happening?" "The mask senses your intent," she said, her voice firm. "It will fight back, but you must stay strong." Ethan reached into his backpack and retrieved the small ceremonial dagger he had found in the stone circle. The dagger was ornate, its blade etched with symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. "Use it," the woman instructed. "The dagger was meant to protect our people, to sever bonds of darkness. Strike the mask with all your strength." Ethan raised the dagger, his hands shaking as the mask's glow grew brighter, almost blinding. A low, guttural sound filled the air, a dark, otherworldly voice speaking in a language he couldn't understand. His grip faltered, but he steadied himself. He thought of the villagers trapped in endless suffering, of their anguished faces, their cries for freedom. This wasn't just about him. It was about them. He took a deep breath and shouted, "This ends now." With all his might, Ethan plunged the dagger into the mask. The blade struck with a burst of light and an ear-shattering scream. The force knocked him back, and he shielded his eyes as the mask shattered into countless pieces. The ground stopped trembling, and the heavy air lifted. Ethan opened his eyes to see the glowing shards of the mask dissolving into golden light, rising into the air like fireflies. The spirits, too, began to glow, their forms becoming clearer and more peaceful. The woman turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You've done it. The curse is broken, and we are free." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. "You're free to rest now. Thank you for guiding me." The spirits smiled, their forms beginning to fade into the light. One by one, they ascended, their voices whispering blessings and thanks. As the last of the spirits vanished, the forest around Ethan began to return to life. The trees grew lush, the air became warm, and the oppressive darkness was gone. Ethan stood alone, but for the first time, the silence felt peaceful. He knew the journey wasn't just about breaking the curse, it had changed him. With a final glance at the altar, now covered in wildflowers, he walked back toward the world he had left behind. But this time, he carried with him a deeper understanding of courage, sacrifice, and the power of truth. Ethan walked away from the altar, his steps slow and deliberate. The world around him had shifted. What was once a place of darkness, haunted by the lingering spirits of the past, was now filled with light and life. The trees had begun to bloom, the air was crisp and fresh, and the oppressive weight that had gripped him for so long was finally gone. As he walked, he noticed something strange. The path ahead of him, which had once felt so unfamiliar and uncertain, now seemed clear. He wasn't just leaving the cursed village behind. He was stepping into a new chapter of his life. But there was something else, something deeper inside him that had changed. He felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known before. The burden of the mask, the pain of the souls, the memories of the sacrifices, they no longer haunted him. Instead, they had been replaced with the understanding that even in the darkest places, there was always hope. That every story, no matter how tragic, could be ended with a truth that set everyone free. Ethan reached the edge of the forest, where the village had once stood. The mist that had covered the area was gone. In its place, there was only the horizon, the setting sun casting a warm golden glow over everything. The world seemed to breathe again, free from the grip of the mask's curse. He smiled softly, looking down at his hands. The dagger, now stripped of its mystical energy, had been left behind in the ruins of the altar. There was no need for it anymore. The weight of the past had been lifted, and the future lay open before him. Suddenly, he heard a voice calling out to him. Turning around, he saw a familiar face, an old friend, someone he hadn't seen in years. It was as if the world had brought them together at the right moment, a reminder that no journey is ever truly made alone. "Ethan," his friend called out, "you look different, like you've been through something incredible." Ethan chuckled softly, his voice filled with a sense of calm he hadn't known he could have. "You could say that. I've just completed a journey, one that changed me forever." His friend raised an eyebrow. You'll have to tell me all about it sometime. Ethan nodded, a sense of gratitude washing over him. I think I will. As they walked together toward the road that led back to the city, the last of the ghosts faded into the horizon, their souls free at last. The mask had been destroyed, the curse broken, and with it, the darkness had lifted from the world. And for Ethan, the journey wasn't over. But now, with the weight of the past behind him and the future in front of him, he was ready for whatever came next.